Hi. In this very mini lecture, I want to talk about how to correctly structure your GitHub repository so that your GitHub pages website is going to work as expected. This is one of the common issues that I've seen with a lot of the recent submissions. So I wanted to make sure that everybody's clear on what's required. Now, GitHub Pages, it behaves the same way that a real web hosting site works. A web server is always going to look for a file called either index.html or sometimes default.html, and it's going to look for this in the main folder. So for us, we're using index.html to represent our home page. And the web server is going to look for this in the main folder. Again, that's going to be your home page. So if the file is buried in a subfolder or say named something else, then the server's not going to find it. It's not going to resolve. Also, your images and your CSS, it needs to be stored in the right folder. So, and also with the correct path. So if you put the images, say, in the wrong place, or you forget to upload it, to your GitHub repository, then the page is not going to be able to be displayed. And then finally, when you make your updates, you don't want to create new files, like chapter 1, chapter 2, so on and so forth. Instead, you want to edit the existing files. That's exactly how it's going to work in a professional environment. You don't publish multiple versions of your homepage. You just update the ones that are live on the site. Okay, so let's talk about like the right and the wrong way. So some of the mistakes that I'm seeing is students are placing, say, the index.html inside of a folder, maybe the Pacific, chapter 1 folder or something like that, or week 1. And that's not going to work because GitHub Pages doesn't go looking for it, doesn't go hunting for it. So it can't be inside of an inner folder. Okay, it has to be at that root folder. Some people are creating, again, multiple versions of their home page, so they'll have like index 1, index 2, so on and so forth. This is not, again, how hosting works. You can only have one home page file. So each week, what you're going to do is you're going to upload or replace that index file, with like maybe whatever your revisions are. When you modify it, then you're going to replace those files. You're not going to upload a whole entire folder. Okay, you're only working with that one folder within your repository. And then also what I'm seeing are some missing image folders, okay? Sometimes people will upload their HTML files, but they forget the images, and then what happens, the paths are broken and nothing's going to display. Now, it can be a little challenging to create, your folder, your images folder. So I did place in the course room, there's a whole page that I have about how you're going to create your images folder if you don't know how to do that. Now, the correct approach is really simple. So, at the root of your repo, meaning the very top level, you should have your index.html file. So if I were looking at this as um, my repo root, okay, then I'm going to have index as, all of my files are going to be listed, within that top level, okay? And then you should also have, like I said, the images folder also at that top level in the root, and then you're going to have all of your images, inside of that. And then any supporting files that you have, like your style sheet and things like that, that should also be at the root level. Okay. And then every week, um, you're going to, when you say improve or you add content or whatever the case is, then you should update your existing files. You're not going to make new copies. Okay. When you do it this way, GitHub Pages knows exactly where to look and your website updates just like the one in the real world. So I want you to think about your website like a house. The index.html file, that's going to be your front door. If you hide it, say in the basement or in another room, visitors are not going to be able to find the entrance, okay? The images and the styles, they're the furniture and the paint. So if you don't put them inside the house, it's going to look empty or plain. So you got to make sure that you include the images and you include your style sheet. Here's the key point. When you update your house, you don't build a brand new one each week, right? You remodel. Okay, so you update the same front door, the same walls, the same furniture. That's what you're doing when you're editing your existing files. You're just updating them. You're not adding like a whole nother index file. You're updating the index file. So, you know, if you go in and maybe replace it, okay, if you delete it and then start over and update, or add the new index file, but I don't want to see multiple index files within that root folder or within the website. So before you submit, I want you to ask yourself these, some questions, okay? Do I have only one index.html in the root? Okay, and that should be the most current, right? The most current index file. Do I have one images folder in the root? Okay, because again, I'm seeing where a lot of people are not adding those images. Am I updating my files weekly instead of duplicating them? And did I test my GitHub pages link to make sure it works? That's what I'm saying also. When I go in and click your link, I'm not seeing your pages. So you need to go in and click the link to see if your page is showing, your website is showing. If it's not showing, then you need to figure out why. Don't just submit, just assume, okay, I've added my repository, my files to my repository and I'm done. You need to test your website, okay, before you submit it, in order to be able to get credit. So, if you answer yes to all of these, then you're good to go. That means that your repo is structured like a real website host and your GitHub pages links should display correctly. So I just wanted to show you an example here of mine. So this is my repo. Okay, you may have several different repositories. Okay, this is the repository that I'm working with. Okay, so this is my repo, and so this is at the root of my repo. Okay, I don't have, the only folder I have is the images folder, and within that folder, I've got all of my images listed in there. Okay, you see, I don't have various different versions. I don't have folders representing, the different chapters or the different versions or anything like that. Okay, and then I've got my clean files. I don't have any zip files here, if you notice that. Okay, this is a representation of my website. Okay, so whatever your web folder is, this root of your repo should represent that. Okay, so I've got, my activities page, my index page, there's my style sheet, there's my yurts page. Okay, and then again, there's my images. If you don't have a README, don't worry about that. Okay, that was something I created when I set up this repository. That's where we would normally put our notes and things like that, but we haven't really talked about that. Okay, but this is what your root should look like. Okay, if your root has more folders in it than this, if it has multiple of these files and things like that, then you need to delete this stuff, clean this stuff out. Okay, and then you would go in and you can re-upload it. Sometimes when you go to try to upload a new file, like maybe a new version of index, it may not write over it. What I usually do is I'll clean this out. So if I go to upload it and say, for instance, it wants to rename it something else or whatever the case is, then I'll just go ahead and delete this one and then upload a new version of it. So this is something that you can do, is you can delete and then upload new versions. But whatever method that you use, this should represent your current website, whatever the current version is, okay, for the specific trails that we're working on. And again, in the course room, I have in that instructions in the very beginning, I gave step-by-step instructions of how to create your GitHub pages. Okay, and so once you create your GitHub pages, then when you come to pages, you should see something like this where it would have a link to your visit site. But here it has what the URL is of my GitHub pages. This is what you're going to provide to me. It should never change. Okay, because again, we're uploading this, we're just revising as far as those files in the root folder. So this should never change. Okay, every time I go here, I should see the most current version. Even if I update the index file, okay, to the newer index, code, this should still be active. Okay, so if I click on this link that it's giving me and it doesn't take me to my web page, then that means I've done something wrong. Either I've got inner nested folders that are not there. Maybe I haven't properly named my index.html, because notice I'm not calling a file after this. I'm not calling index.html after this. Okay, that's what I'm saying with the web server knows what the default page is, and usually it's going to either be index.html or maybe default.html, depending on how your server is configured. This one's configured to know that if I call this URL without a file name, it's going to automatically look for the home page, which is the index.html page. Okay, and that's what you're going to provide to me. And when you click on that, it should take you to the home page of your website. And again, make sure you check this before you submit it. Don't just give me a link and say, okay, this is my home page. If you haven't checked it, it may not resolve to your index HTML file. Okay, so the biggest takeaways is I want you to treat, like I said, the GitHub repository, that's going to be as like it's your website's hosting folder. Okay, also within that folder, keep things neat. Keep the home page in the root. Update existing files each week, and always test your GitHub pages link. This is going to save you a lot of frustration, and get you in the habit of working like a professional developer. Okay, other than that, have a good rest of your week. And if you have any questions about anything that I've gone over, like I said, I did provide additional resources um, this week to help you as far as creating your images folder, if that's where you're running into issues with, talking about the structure. I also sent out an email again talking about the structure, because this is going to be important, okay, as we move forward with these GitHub pages. This is where your website's going to lie, and you got to get this straight for the for these website case studies, because you're going to build another repository for your actual website that you're going to be working on, your personal website. Okay, so we've got to get this part straight. So if you run into any issues, please let me know. Okay, check those resources that I provided to you first, and then email me if you need additional resources. All right, have a good one.